In this emotional journey, Aarya is haunted by the constant thoughts of a man from her past, Ravi. What begins as unresolved love spirals into a spiritual awakening, where Aarya uncovers karmic bonds, past lives, and soul contracts, ultimately realizing that the true message isn't about Ravi but about her own healing and self-discovery. The thought that wouldn't leave expanded and enriched. It began, as most hauntings do, in silence. Aarya jolted awake at 2:11 a.m., her body slick with sweat, her breath shallow. A single word pulsed behind her eyes like a forgotten name written in fire, Ravi. She hadn't thought about him in years, at least, not consciously. 6 long years had passed since he disappeared from her life without explanation. No phone calls. No email. No clean ending. He simply disappeared. And with time, the ache had dulled into a cold numbness, tucked into the attic of her memory like an old letter left unread. But now he was everywhere. First it was his name on the spine of a novel in a bookstore she'd never been to. Then on a coffee cup the barista handed her, even though she hadn't said that name. Then in the mouths of strangers, someone laughing on a park bench, calling out Ravi. To a child who didn't turn around. At first, Aarya told herself it was a coincidence. A trick of the mind. She had read once that the brain notices what the heart suppresses. But then came the whispers. Low. Faint. Echoing from somewhere she couldn't place. When she stood at the mirror brushing her teeth. When she turned off the stove. When she blinked just a little too long. It's not over, they said. Soft, like a secret the universe was no longer willing to keep. Disturbed but defiant, she tore through the drawers of her old writing desk late one night, searching for a distraction. Instead, she found it, a dusty envelope, yellowed with time. No stamp. Just her own handwriting on the front, for Ravi. She didn't remember writing it. Hands trembling, she opened it. The letter was full of raw emotion, rage, sorrow, unspoken apologies. The kind of honesty that only exists when you know it will never be read. Except at the bottom, in the smallest handwriting, a single word had been stamped in faded blue ink, read. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't mailed this. She hadn't shown this to anyone. So how? She dropped the letter. Suddenly, everything felt different. This wasn't about nostalgia anymore. It wasn't even about him. Something had awakened. And it wanted her attention. The dreams no more than she does expanded and enriched. The dreams began the night after she found the letter. At first, they were just flickers, blurry fragments of someone calling her name from underwater. But each night, they grew sharper, louder, more visceral. And always the same scene, Ravi, waist deep in a black ocean, reaching towards her with eyes full of terror, mouthing something she couldn't quite hear. Something urgent. Every time she tried to reach for him, her limbs turned to stone. And just before he disappeared beneath the waves, he would scream but no sound ever came. Aarya started sleeping with the lights on. She began writing the dreams down, desperate to make sense of them. The details were oddly specific, a brass key in his hand, the number 103, Sanskrit phrases she couldn't translate, and always, the sound of bells ringing in reverse. At first, the details felt random. But one morning, after another sleepless night, she lined her pages across the floor. Something clicked. The symbols were repeating. The numbers. They were in sequence. And the Sanskrit wasn't gibberish, it was ancient Vedic scripture. Each dream ended with a number. 1745. 103-8. She looked them up, out of curiosity. They matched verses from the Garuda Purana, an ancient Hindu text that describes the soul's journey after death, karmic debts and spiritual contracts between souls who must meet again, life after life, until the debt is paid. Aarya sat frozen in her kitchen. The air had gone still. What debt, what bond could be strong enough to invade her dreams? 6 years after silence later that day, she caught her reflection in the window. She was thinner. Paler. Her eyes looked older than they had any right to be. It was as if someone was slowly pulling energy out of her, night by night. And then, one evening, she dreamed of a temple on fire. In it, Ravi stood on the altar, holding the same letter she had found in her drawer. He looked directly at her and said, finally audible for the first time, "You forgot the promise." She shot awake with a gasp. The clock read 2:11 am again. There was no mistaking it anymore. These weren't dreams. They were memories. But not from this life. The return of the mirror expanded and enriched. Aarya was beginning to unravel. She stopped sleeping. Her journals were filled with fevered symbols and broken Sanskrit phrases. Her therapist gently suggested stress. Her friends said she needed a break. But none of them saw what she saw. Not the shadows that moved without light. Not the mirrors that flickered with someone else's face. It all escalated one rainy afternoon. Aarya was walking home from work, head down, when someone bumped into her hard enough to knock her bag open. She bent to gather her things, but the stranger just stared. "You've got his eyes," he said. She froze. "What did you say?" The man blinked, confused. "Sorry, I thought you were someone else." And then he walked away, whistling a melody she swore Ravi used to hum when nervous. That night, Aarya did something she hadn't done in years. She booked a session with a spiritual medium. Not because she believed in them, but because everything rational was failing her. The medium's name was Ravi. He wore a ring made of bone and spoke in riddles. But as soon as Aarya sat across from him, his smile faded. "You've brought someone with you," he said, not asking. "I came alone." Ravi shook his head. "No. You're tethered. Bound to someone you never cut the cord from. You're feeling what he feels." Aarya scoffed. "This is ridiculous." But then he said the name. Ravi Ahalya. Her blood ran cold. She had never given him the name. Not even a clue. "I don't know how you." Ravi raised a hand and stood up. He walked to a shelf, shuffled through a stack of photos, and pulled out a worn Polaroid. "I took this last week, near the foothills of Dharamshala," he said. He was with a group meditating near the Hanuman temple. He slid the photo towards her. There he was. Ravi. Hair longer now, face leaner. But unmistakable. And around his neck, a necklace. Beads of Rudraksh and moonstone, the exact one Aarya had placed around her mother's neck before cremation 5 years ago. It had been made for her mother. Hand-threaded with her own fingers. It had burned with her. Her stomach turned. How could he be wearing it? How could he have it unless? The air in the room tightened. "You two aren't finished," Ravi said. "But it's not love that keeps souls like yours connected. It's karma. And karma always collects." His side of the silence expanded and enriched. While Aarya wrestled with symbols and whispers, halfway across the country, Ravi was already drowning in silence. He lived in the Dharamshala now, in a modest ashram built into the side of a pine-covered slope, far from noise, from people. From her. but peace had eluded him. He had been there for nearly 6 years, but the insomnia never left. Not even the mantras, the fasting, or the silence retreats worked. Because no matter what he did to quiet his mind, one name always found its way in like a drop of ink in water: Aarya. He saw her everywhere. In the clouds during fire rituals. In the flames of his meditation lamp. Reflected in glass just long enough to convince him she was real. He tried to convince himself it was guilty. Regret. The typical residue of a love left without closure. But it was more than that. One night, during a sacred fire puja, Ravi entered a deep trance, something deeper than meditation. It was as if he'd slipped out of time. In the center of the fire, he saw her not as she was now, but dressed in red silk, eyes lined in kohl, speaking a language he didn't understand. She said one word. Remember. He snapped out of the trance, gasping for air. The priest beside him looked concerned. You shouldn't be here, the priest whispered. I just saw. I know what you saw, the man said, grim. You've been marked. It was then Ravi finally confessed about Aarya, about the dreams, about the necklace he found 5 years ago lying outside his door, still warm to the touch. The old priest looked at him with an expression Ravi couldn't decipher, pity or fear. And then came the warning: if you speak to her again, one of you will not survive this life. Ravi tried to laugh it off, but the next night, he woke up with scratches across his chest and the name Aarya carved faintly into the fog on his window, from the inside. He stopped meditating after that. He stopped chanting her name in his thoughts. He tried to forget. But some connections, forged before birth, are stronger than free will. The past life files expanded and enriched. Aarya had tried everything. She meditated. She journaled. She sought answers from mediums, priests, books. But nothing prepared her for what happened when she found the journal. It had been tucked away at the bottom of an old box, buried under a pile of receipts and forgotten notebooks. She hadn't seen it in years, the journal from 2011. She had written in it every day, chronicling her thoughts and emotions after a breakup, a period of deep transformation. But one entry stood out from the others. It was the day she first saw Ravi. She had sketched him in the margins, a man with sharp features, dark eyes, and a presence that haunted even the paper. The likeness was eerie, too precise, too real. The hairline, the jawline, the posture, the eyes. But Aarya had never met him back then. Not in this life. She couldn't have. The journal entry that accompanied the sketch was simple, more like a poem, a cry from a soul she didn't know was hers. He is a stranger, but I know him. I've known him in dreams, in lifetimes before. He's always been my other half, even when he isn't here. The words hit her like a wave. She had written those words years before she ever crossed paths with Ravi. There was no logical explanation for it. Unable to shake the unease, Aarya sought a past life regression therapist. She couldn't afford to ignore the pull anymore. The sensation of being connected to him across time was suffocating. The therapist's office smelled of incense and sandalwood, the air thick with unspoken energy. Aarya lay on the table, breathing deeply, allowing herself to drift into the hypnotic trance. And that's when she saw it. A field. Endless, stretching beyond sight. She was young again, standing beside Ravi, only, this time, they weren't strangers. They were twins. But the dream twisted quickly. There was betrayal, sharp, cold, and Aarya saw herself pushing him away, offering him up to a third figure, a lover, a person who shouldn't have mattered. It was a moment frozen in time, their bond severed by choice, by sacrifice. She had betrayed him to save someone else. To hold on to something she shouldn't have. The images flickered. In another life, she had let him die. Aarya's breath hitched as the regression therapist guided her through the scene. She felt the weight of the betrayal pressing on her chest, suffocating her. The pain of that lifetime bled into her very bones. It wasn't just a memory. It was a part of her. He died, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The therapist nodded. And you promised, in that lifetime, that you would find him again. That you would heal the wound. The room felt colder. Aarya sat up, shaking. The past life faded, but the guilt so familiar remained. Ravi had been her twin, and in another life, she had been the one to destroy him. Was this her karmic debt? She didn't know how to move forward. But one thing was clear now, the tie between them wasn't just fate. It was ancient. It was written in the stars and etched into the very fabric of her soul. The hidden contract expanded and enriched. The idea of soul contracts was strange to Aarya. She had heard about them before, briefly whispers in the metaphysical community, references to karmic bonds that tie souls together across lifetimes. But it never felt real until she found herself sitting in front of a monk in a small, candlelit temple in the Dharamsala, her heart pounding with a sense of impending doom. Aarya had traveled there after weeks of torment. The dreams, the visions, the constant feeling of Ravi's presence, it had all become unbearable. The spiritual medium, Kavi, had spoken of binding forces, karmic debts, but it was this monk Master Anand, a man of few words who seemed to know everything before she even spoke. He didn't ask her name. He only asked, in a soft, almost imperceptible voice, "What do you want to know?" Aarya hesitated. She wanted answers. She wanted relief. The connection to Ravi felt more like a curse than a gift. She needed to know what it all meant, why it was happening. Why him? She took a shaky breath. Why can't I let go? Why does he haunt my thoughts, my dreams? What's the connection? Master Anand's eyes deepened, his gaze penetrating, as if seeing through her. He spoke slowly, each word heavy with ancient wisdom. You were promised to him. Not in this life, but in the one before. And not by choice. You entered into a bond before your birth, an agreement to meet again, to heal, to complete something that was left undone. Aarya's heart began to race. But why? What was left undone? She whispered. Master Anand's voice was a soft murmur in the silence. Your souls were torn apart in the past, through betrayal. You were twins bound, inseparable. In that life, one of you sacrificed the other for love. And that choice created a rift, a wound. The bond was severed, but it was never healed. And so, the contract was made. He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. You asked to meet him again. But you never specified how the bond would end. Aarya stared at him, her mind spinning. She had always felt that there was something unfinished, something missing. But this was something beyond what she had ever imagined. What do you mean? How would it end? She asked, the words tasting foreign on her tongue. Master Anand's eyes narrowed, and he placed a hand gently on her forehead. The bond can be completed, or it can be severed, but each choice carries consequences. If you complete the bond, it will free you both, but someone close to you will disappear. If you sever the bond without completion, you risk losing everything: your connection, your path, your soul's purpose in this life. The room seemed to contract, and Aarya's chest tightened. What kind of choice is that? Her mind reeled, but the monk's words reverberated through her thoughts. Someone close to you will disappear. She couldn't ignore that. She had already lost so much. Could she bear another loss? But what if severing the bond meant she would lose Ravi forever? What if their past life was the reason for the echo in her soul, the reason for the haunting presence of him in her life? There was no easy path. And if I choose neither? Aarya asked, a desperate edge in her voice. Master Anand's gaze softened, as if pitying her. His hand left her forehead and rested by his side. Then you will be trapped in the cycle. You will meet again and again. Unfinished, unhealed, forever circling. The air around her grew thick, as if the temple walls themselves were closing in. The weight of her choices, her past, her future hung in the balance. She was no longer just Aarya, a woman seeking answers. She was a woman caught in the web of destiny, tied to a man who had been her twin in another life, bound by a karmic thread that could not be unraveled. The monk's voice broke through the fog of her mind. The universe doesn't offer easy paths, only those that bring transformation. But what transformation was she ready for? The reunion that wasn't meant to happen expanded and enriched. The moment Aarya made the decision to travel to Dharamsala, the world around her began to change. At first, it was subtle clouds that shifted too quickly across the sky, the temperature dropping or rising without explanation. But as she drew closer to her destination, the distortions became more noticeable, more impossible to ignore. Her body began to feel heavy, as if invisible weights were pressing down on her shoulders, dragging her forward with an unseen force. It was as if the universe itself was trying to stop her. When she reached the outskirts of Dharamsala, it felt like the very air had changed. The road narrowed. The trees pressed in, their branches like gnarled fingers. Arya's heart thudded louder than it ever had before. The energy was so thick, it felt as though the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting. The sounds of the world became muffled. Crows screeched from distant rooftops, their calls almost in unison, eerily echoing her name, Aarya. Aarya. The wind picked up, whipping her hair around her face, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw a figure in the distance, Ravi. But when she blinked, he was gone. Her heart raced. She could feel his presence growing stronger. He was here. She was so close to him. The closer she got to the center of the town, the more the time itself seemed to warp. Seconds stretched, minutes dissolved into hours, and the familiar landscape twisted into something strange, alien. Her body grew weaker, she stumbled, her legs buckling beneath her, as if her very soul was trying to run in the opposite direction. The pull was magnetic. Aarya collapsed at the foot of an old temple, her head spinning, her breathing shallow. She could barely keep her eyes open, but she felt him. Ravi. He was close. Just around the corner. She knew it. In her daze, Aarya heard a soft rustling. She felt a presence leaning over her, an energy she couldn't escape. Was it him? No. The scent of sandalwood wasn't quite right. The hands that touched her skin felt rougher than his would have. It was a stranger. He was dressed in simple robes, his face creased with worry as he knelt by her. He spoke her name, gently but firmly, trying to rouse her. She looked up at him through half-lidded eyes. "It's you," she whispered. "You're him, aren't you?" The stranger's face faltered for a moment, his eyes clouded with something she couldn't place. He shook his head slowly, his mouth tight. "No," he said softly, his voice betraying sadness. "But I know him. And you shouldn't be here." Arya's thoughts were a blur, her body trembling, but the voice inside her mind screamed one thing: go back. You can't meet him. The stranger's words blurred into the background as Aarya's vision focused once again. She heard a door creak open behind her, and she looked up, feeling the familiar pull of his name in her chest, a spiritual tether she couldn't resist. Ravi stood in the doorway. But he wasn't running to her. No, this wasn't a reunion. This was fear in his eyes. He wasn't relieved. He wasn't rushing to embrace her. His feet were frozen, his back straight, every muscle in his body taut with the pressure of what he had been avoiding. He was running from her. Aarya's breath caught in her throat. She tried to speak, to call his name, but it wouldn't come. Something was wrong. Her body shook, and she fought against the growing sense of inevitability. No. No. This couldn't be how it was supposed to happen. And then, like a snap of a string, everything stopped. Ravi did not move. He only looked at her, his eyes full of terror, pain, and regret. He turned away. Aarya collapsed onto the cold stone floor, the wind swirling around her like a vortex. She thought she heard him whisper, but the words were lost in the wind. But it didn't matter. Because she knew. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about a happy reunion. It was about the universe's decree. Something had come between them, a force they couldn't fight. At that moment, Aarya realized the truth: they were not meant to meet like this. Not now. Not this way. Not in this lifetime. And yet, the bond was still there. Silent. Unyielding. It wasn't over. The warning comes true, expanded and enriched. Aarya couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The pull of the universe had twisted her path so tightly, and now, standing in the temple, half breathing and half forgetting, she knew her next steps would determine more than just her future. It would determine everyone's fate. When she had collapsed near the temple, something inside her had broken, a quiet realization that she wasn't just running to find Ravi, she was running from something deeper. But in that moment of clarity, a new fear settled in her chest. Ravi had avoided her, his gaze cold, his fear palpable. It had been a rejection, a warning that something had gone terribly wrong. And the feeling of loss started to grip her heart. She had to leave. She had to go back. But as she gathered herself and began the long walk back to where she was staying, the sky overhead darkened. It wasn't just the evening's twilight settling over the mountains, it was something heavier. Aarya didn't know why she couldn't shake the thought, but her mind began to loop back to that conversation with Master Anand, the monk. The words he had spoken echoed in her ears: if you complete the bond this time, someone close to you will disappear. The warning. The curse. The karmic shift. Aarya could no longer deny that she had felt a shift. It was subtle at first, disorienting. But now, it was undeniable. The universe had pushed her into this path for a reason, but the question was, had she crossed a line? It wasn't long before the news reached her. Her best friend, Kiran, had gone missing. Gone without a trace. No one knew where she was. The police had no leads. Her apartment had been untouched, no signs of a struggle. The only thing they found was a small, cryptic note, just a few words scribbled in Kiran's handwriting: I'm sorry. I couldn't stop it. I tried. The words sent a chill down Aarya's spine. She knew. It was connected. Her best friend's disappearance. The bond between Aarya and Ravi. The shift in the fabric of the universe that had started the moment she arrived in the Ramshala. Aarya collapsed into a chair, staring at the phone in her hands. Her mind was reeling, trying to piece together a connection that didn't want to make sense. The monk's warning had been real, someone close to her would disappear. And now, it was happening. It was too late to take back the steps she had taken. Aarya rushed to the temple where Master Anand had warned her. When she arrived, the monk was standing near the door, as though waiting for her. Master Anand, it's happened. Kiran is gone. Where is she? What have I done? Master Anand's face was unreadable. He didn't speak immediately. He simply nodded, as if he had expected this. His eyes bore the weight of ages, and when he finally spoke, his voice was soft, but heavy with inevitability. The bond is complete, Aarya. You have entered the cycle fully now. But there is one choice remaining. Aarya's heart ached with confusion and horror. What choice? What do I do now? She demanded, her voice trembling. I can't lose anyone else. I can't lose Kiran. Please tell me what to do. Master Anand turned away and walked towards the altar, his movements slow and deliberate. He picked up a small bowl of water, letting the cool liquid spill over his fingers. His eyes were distant, almost as if he were speaking from another realm. The bond is a contract. And in this life, you must choose: close the loop with Ravi or protect the people you love. One will be lost if you continue. Aarya felt the weight of his words crush her chest. Kiran had paid the price. The universe had started to balance itself, but in its eyes, this was not the end, it was just the beginning. There were no easy choices. There never were. If I sever the bond with Ravi, Aarya whispered, her voice thick with emotion, will Kiran come back? The monk looked at her, his gaze gentle but firm. You cannot undo what has been done. The choices you make have already set the path. If you complete the bond, you will heal the wound in both your souls, but there will be another loss. If you sever it, you will sever your path with him forever. And you may lose more than just one. Aarya's mind swam in confusion, her thoughts crashing together like violent waves. Ravi. Kiran. The bond. The curse. The choice was clear, Ravi or Kiran. But the consequences would echo for eternity. How could she possibly make this decision? The room around her began to spin as the universe seemed to watch, waiting for her final choice. Could she save her friend and lose herself, or should she follow the karmic path and save herself at the cost of another? In that moment, she realized, the universe would never make this easy. It had given her the choice of love, of healing, of forgiveness, but it was not without sacrifice. And she was running out of time. Letting go to remember expanded and enriched. Aarya stood in the temple courtyard, the wind whispering against her skin, her heart beating heavily in her chest. Her hands trembled, still clutching the letter she had written to Ravi, the one she'd never sent, yet always meant to. This was it. This was the final moment. She had already decided. The karmic bond between her and Ravi had to end. The universe had demanded it. Kiran's disappearance had been the last warning, a loss too great to ignore, a price too high to pay. But the price of letting go was not easier. Aarya had spent the past several weeks in a fog, trying to make sense of the rift inside her. The overwhelming love for Ravi, coupled with the insatiable pull of their shared past, was a constant weight on her soul. The bond had become a tether she couldn't break, no matter how much her heart screamed for peace. She remembered the days when she and Ravi had first met, when the world seemed smaller, when love had felt so simple, so right. But those memories, once bright and beautiful, had turned into chains, heavy with the weight of unfinished business, with wounds from lifetimes ago. She had to release it all. The ritual she was about to perform was ancient, passed down through generations of spiritual practitioners. A soul cord-cutting ceremony meant to sever the ties of attachment, to untangle souls who had been bound together across lifetimes. The monk had warned her, to sever the bond is to free both souls from the cycle. But the pain, Aarya, the pain of release will feel like death. She knew that. She had been warned. And yet, she couldn't escape it. Aarya walked to the center of the courtyard, where the soft glow of candlelight flickered around the sacred altar. The night was silent, the air thick with anticipation. She closed her eyes, taking a slow, steadying breath, and began to speak aloud, the words of the ceremony familiar to her soul, as though they were written in the very fabric of her being. I release you, Ravi. The words tasted bitter on her tongue, as though something was ripping open inside her. Her heart clenched with the weight of what she was doing. Was this truly the right path? Could this really be the end of their story? But then, she thought about the warning, the cost of her choices. If she didn't sever the bond, someone else would pay. Kiran was already gone, lost to the very force that connected her to Ravi. I release you from my past. From my heart. From the shadows we share. The wind picked up as she spoke, swirling around her like the breath of ancient spirits. As she repeated the words, the energy around her grew intense, crackling with the weight of the severing ritual. The universe was listening. The light from the candles flickered wildly, the air crackling as if it, too, was sensing the great spiritual shift. And then, Aarya's soul felt the severing. The bond between her and Ravi, the cord that had bound them for lifetimes, the one that had caused both pain and inexplicable love, snapped. There was no going back. She screamed, not in pain, but in release. The sound echoed through the temple like a roar of freedom, as if every part of her soul was finally allowed to let go of the weight that had crushed her for years. And then silence. Aarya collapsed to her knees, feeling the emptiness and the release wash over her. Her tears fell, but this time they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of cleansing. Of healing. She looked up to the night sky, the stars seeming more vivid now, their light clear and bright. In that moment, she realized what this had all been about. It had never been about Ravi. Or about the bond. Or even about the past lives that had entangled their fates. It had always been about her. The universe had used Ravi's face, his name, his presence, to force her to face the parts of herself she had hidden away for so long. The pain, the fear, the regret, these were hers to confront, not his. Aarya stood, feeling lighter than she had ever felt in her life. The air around her was fresh, as though the world had been reborn. She could breathe again, and for the first time in years, she felt free. She turned and walked towards the temple doors, the light of the candles flickering in the distance. She was different now. No longer bound to a past she couldn't change, no longer attached to a soul she had outgrown. As she stepped outside, she looked down at her hands, feeling the emptiness, the freedom of her choice. And yet, there was still one last thing she needed to do. One final act of closure. Aarya pulled the letter from her pocket, the letter she had written to Ravi, the one she had never sent. She looked at it one last time, her heart heavy but sure. She knew now what she had to do. She burned it. The letter caught fire quickly, the flames licking the edges of the paper. As it crumbled to ash, Aarya felt the last of the old ties fade away. Her heart was no longer a prisoner to the past. The final piece had fallen into place. The pain stopped. The echoes of his name, the dreams, the visions, the memories ceased. In that silence, Aarya realized the truth: this wasn't about Ravi. This was always about her. Her own unfinished healing. Her own journey to wholeness. And with that realization, a strange peace settled over her. The message was never about him, expanded and enriched. Aarya returned home weeks later, the weight of the past months lifting from her shoulders like a fog slowly receding. It was as though the world itself had shifted, its edges sharper, its colors more vivid. She had changed. There was no denying it. The person who had walked into the Dharamshala was no longer the same person who now stood at her front door, looking at the world through new eyes. She had let go of the bond. She had cut the karmic cord that had tied her to Ravi. She had completed the ritual. She had faced her deepest fears, severed the ties, and walked away free. But something still lingered in the back of her mind, a thought that gnawed at her, a question that refused to be silenced. Why did it happen for so long? Aarya had believed that the constant thoughts of Ravi, the repeated dreams, the overwhelming sensations, that he had been the message. She had thought it was about the love they shared, the unfinished business, the karmic cycle they were bound to complete. She had believed it was about him. But now, standing in her own living room, a sense of clarity washed over her. It was all so much clearer now. She had traveled to the Dharamshala, had gone through the trials, had lived through the torment of her thoughts, and in the end, it was never about Ravi. It had never been about him at all. The truth unfolded like a sunrise, slow but undeniable. Aarya had been running from herself. The universe had used Ravi's face, his presence, to force her to confront the parts of herself she had refused to acknowledge. The fears. The pain. The unhealed wounds from her past, wounds that had nothing to do with Ravi, but everything to do with her own soul's journey. The love she had felt for Ravi, the connection that had bound them across lifetimes, was only a reflection of something deeper. It had been a mirror, forcing her to see the parts of herself that had been broken, the parts she had neglected. It was about her healing, her growth, her own ability to face the shadow within. It wasn't until she severed the bond, until she performed the soul cord-cutting ceremony, that she had understood. The universe had sent him to show her the way to heal her own heart. Ravi had been the catalyst, not the destination. As Aarya sat down at her desk, her mind still processing the profound shift, she picked up a letter she had left on her desk. It had been there for weeks, unopened, yet she hadn't been able to bring herself to throw it away. The letter was strange. It had no return address, no stamp, no identifying marks. It was just a plain envelope. Curiosity tugged at her, and she slowly tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, with a single line written in neat, crisp handwriting, "You remembered. Now I can forget." Aarya's heart skipped a beat. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. It wasn't Ravi's voice, but it might as well have been. For the first time, she understood. It had never been about him. The universe had used Ravi's presence, his name, his face, as the mirror to force her to confront the parts of herself that she had refused to heal. It wasn't about love, or unfinished karma. It was about self-realization, about the lessons she needed to learn. And now that she had learned them, the cycle was over. Aarya smiled softly, a sense of peace settling over her like a warm blanket. She had remembered, and in doing so, she had let go of the past, the pain, and the old patterns that had held her captive. The message had been clear all along, even when she couldn't see it. He wasn't the lesson. She was. As she stood up, a sense of calm filled her entire being. The echo of Ravi's name faded. The dreams stopped. The thoughts no longer came rushing at her like an avalanche. Aarya was free. And as she stood there, looking at the world with fresh eyes, she realized that sometimes the hardest journey isn't the one we take to reach someone else. It's the journey we take to reach ourselves.